The Negro Family, The Case for National Action, Office of Policy Planning and Research, United States Department of Labor, March 1965. It's also known as the Moynihan Report. Daniel Patrick Moynihan. To begin with, he starts off with the Negro American Revolution. The United States is approaching a new crisis in race relations. The Black American Revolution is the most important domestic event of the post-war period in the United States. President Lyndon B. Johnson said, "You do not take a person who for years has been hobbled by chains and liberate him, bring him up to the starting line of race, and then say you are free to compete with all the others, and still justly believe that you have been completely fair. Thus, it is not enough just to open the gates of opportunity. All our citizens must have the ability to walk through those gates." So to begin, we begin this report with recognizing a crisis in the race relations between Black people and their struggles of poverty and why they live in poverty and why the statistics for them living in the poverty is much greater than white people or any other minorities. In slide 3, the Negro American Revolution. Things such as the Vietnam War and riots took the attention away from the spending that was used on social programs to help Black people progress and to give them better opportunities. And then to continue, Blacks continue to be discriminated for generations to follow. 3 centuries of unimaginable mistreatment have taken their toll on Black people, such as lynching, the Jim Crow laws, segregation, discrimination, and oppression. They are not seen as equal with other minority groups, such as the European immigrants and other minorities. They're not treated equally as them. They're treated much more harsher since the freeing of slaves. It's hard for white Americans to understand that circumstances of Black American community in recent years has probably been getting worse and not better. The white community is very colorblind to what the Black community is facing and the struggles that they've been going with or that they've been dealing with. The gap between the Black and most other groups in American society is widening than other minorities and whites. On to slide 4, the end of the beginning. There were many administrative events that were offered or given to help the labor market for Black Americans, such as the Equal Employment Opportunity and on the enactment of Manpower Development and Training Act of 1962. It basically summarized the unequal position in the labor market that Black Americans face. And then there's the Economic Opportunity Act of 1964 to abolish poverty. Third, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 marked the end of an era for legal and formal discriminations against Black, but that didn't stop the harassment and racism that they faced. On to slide. The demand for equality. Liberty and equality can be given, but they mean 2 different things, such as Lincoln freed the slaves, but they were given liberty and not equality. I meant to say that they were given liberty but not equality. The fundamental problem in which this is most clear the case that is of family structure. Faulkner said, "Equal right and opportunity to make the best one can of one's life within one's capability without fear of injustice or oppression or threat of violence." That feeling of having the high surveillance in the ghetto neighborhoods that the Black people were placed in has an effect on their overall environment. It's not as comfortable as these high-class environments that these white people live in. They don't have the living of fear of being arrested or being taken from their families for little issues such as getting pulled over for something so small. They don't have to worry about that much as Black people. They're constantly being watched and they're just waiting for that moment. The cops are waiting, like the high surveillance, are waiting for that moment for a screw up to arrest them and take them away. And living in that environment, it's just a constant state of fear. Equality of opportunity almost ensures inequality of results. The demand for equality for economic results. Programs made for the first phase of Negro Revolution. Manpower, restraining the job corps, community action, etc., only make opportunities available. They cannot ensure the outcomes. So this means that there are programs made to help Black people get these jobs, such as like interviews to get these like better interviews for better opportunities and better jobs. But they didn't ensure that they would get the jobs, and they didn't ensure better outcomes. In slide 6, the prospect for equality, meaning the future for equality for the Black Americans. Certain data series are available only in terms of the white and non-white populations. This necessarily induces some inaccuracies, but does not appear to produce any significant distortions. The statistics on non-whites generally understate the degree of disorganization of the Black family and underdeployment of Black men. On slide 7, the Negro American family. It is hard for whites to perceive the effect that 3 centuries of exploitation have had on the fabric of Black society itself, because they didn't experience it themselves. Again, they're colorblind because they don't experience these things. They've had it good for the beginning, since the beginning, the slave masters and all that, because they didn't face this. They didn't know how it was to be separated from their families, and to live in this fear, to be owned. They don't know any of it, so they're colorblind to the struggles. Here, the consequences of the historic injustice done to Black Americans are silent and hidden from view. Again, the government chooses to ignore the injustice of Black people. They choose to ignore the struggles that they go through instead of trying to solve it. The family is the basic social unit of American life. It is the basic socializing unit. Adult conduct in society is learned as a child. A fundamental insight of psychoanalytic theory, for example, is that the child learns a way of looking at life in his early years through which all later experience is viewed, and which profoundly shapes his adult conduct. The white family has achieved a high degree of stability and is maintaining that stability. By contrast, the family structure of the lower class Black family is highly unstable, and in many urban centers, it is approaching complete breakdown. So basically, the American Black family, is since they're like facing these struggles of employment, and they're end of employment and having a stable income in their family, it is hard to keep up, and it's hard to have a stable family altogether because they're constantly struggling, and they're focusing on these struggles and focusing on their family altogether. And it's for white families, they have a higher degree of stability because they have higher incomes, and they don't have to worry about the struggles that these Black Americans have to face, such as finding jobs and trying to fit in instead of being discriminated against. On slide 8, nearly a quarter of urban Negro marriages are dissolved. So now we're seeing more failed marriages in the Black community because of the expectations that Black men are facing. So to begin, nearly a quarter of Black women living in cities who have ever married are now divorced, separated, or living apart from their husbands. The rates are highest in the urban Northeast, where 26% of Black women ever married are either divorced, separated, or have their husbands absent. And this again, because of the Black men feel this expectation of keeping their families stable. They feel overstressed, they become aggressive, they end up leaving their homes, and then the wife's having to take over and raise the children on her own, and then live separately, and then the divorce rates are much higher. Unfortunately, those who do leave the homes leave without divorcing their wives, and then those wives can't have a divorce, and then if they find someone else, they can't get married because they're not divorced. On to slide 9. Nearly 1/4 of Black births are now illegitimate. Both white and Black illegitimacy rates have been increasing, but not as rapidly as for Black people. The white rate has 2% in 1940, and it was 3.07% in 1963. In that period, the rate for Black people went from Black illegitimacy births went from 16.8% to 23.6%. There are, of course, limits to dependability of these statistics. There are almost certainly a considerable number of black children who, although technically illegitimate, are in fact offsprings of stable unions, stable marriages. Um, so some of them who are born from illegitimacy do sometimes end up in stable unions when the mom finds some, or when the wife finds someone else and lives in a stable household. A similar picture of disintegrating black marriages emerges from the divorce statistics. Divorces have increased of late for both whites and non-whites, but at a much greater rate of the latter. Almost one-fourth of black families are now headed by the women. As a result of this high rate of divorce, separation, and desertion, a very large percentage of black families are headed by females. It has been estimated that only a minority of black children that reach the age of 18 lived their whole lives with both their parents. So it's a very small amount that we see. And that's still in, and that we can still see that today, how the lack of fathers, the missing presence of the father leads to the effects of growing up without their father. It leads to these struggles. On to 11. The breakdown of the black family has led to a sudden increase of welfare dependency. The breakdown of the black family has led to the sudden increase in welfare dependency. Now that the mothers, it's mainly the mothers that are taking care of the children of their own, and without the father presence and the only one income coming in through the household, they now have to depend on the welfare system. On a 1960 study of aid to dependent children in Cook County, it stated that the typical mother in Cook County was married and had children by her husband, who was then deserted and his whereabouts are unknown. And since he cannot contribute to support the children, she is not free to remarry because she doesn't know his whereabouts, so she can't divorce him, so she can't remarry, and she has illegitimate children, and since her husband has left. And since she can't remarry and she has children with her future partner, that makes those children illegitimate. Chapter 3, The Roots of Problems, Slavery. And the 13th Amendment was in 1865. It was the abolition of slavery. The 14th Amendment came 3 years later. It basically was meant to give equality for black men and white men altogether. But this excluded women when it came to voting. But the men were free to vote and they were given equal protection of laws. But we don't see this because they were still treated very poorly compared to white people. They were discriminated against, and the oppression and the racism that they faced. American slavery was profoundly different from and in its lasting effects on individuals and their children. To summarize, the American slavery, when it was over with and the slaves were freed, they didn't have anything to start from. They didn't have homes. So with what money were they going to have homes to start or find homes for, find jobs? They didn't have inheritance from families because they were taken from their homes in other places. So they didn't really have anywhere to start from. And this led to the struggles of their children and their children's children because they have to start from scratch, and then from having to save money and then trying to paying rent, paying mortgage and all that, and having food on the table, keeping a stable family. It's hard to have that from the beginning, and it has a lasting effect on their descendants. The slave could not by law be taught to read, write, or could not practice any religion without the permission of his master, and could never meet with his fellows for religious or any other purposes except the presence of a white. And finally, if a master wished for him to be free, every legal obstacle was used to thwart such action. Oh, so there was lots of legal obstacles to prevent this from happening. This differentiated from ancient slavery, such as in the Roman and Greek slavery, because they were actually given opportunities to free themselves by making money and being able to free themselves and their families. They were also allowed to read and write. It was much different. They weren't treated as harshly. They weren't treated as like the American slaves. This is much worse. Slavery also affected and started the fatherless patterns of separating families. So we're going to go into depth of this cause into the future slides. Reconstruction. Black people were given liberty but not equality. Liberty and equality are two separate things. The black men were used to humiliate more than women because they were seen more as a threat than women were. These public humiliations kept from having a strong father figure in a black household because they were often belittled. E. Franklin Fraser makes clear that at the time of emancipation, black women were already accustomed to playing the dominant role in the family and marriage relations, and that this role persisted in decades of rural life that followed. Urbanizations. Urbanization. Blacks are now more urbanized than whites. White migrants were given new and better opportunities as long as they were to be racist and belittle black people as well. They were given opportunities such as living in the suburbs. They were allowed to move to better environments, live in better environments, and so then the black people moved into their old slums and now ghettos. Black families are in the cities are more frequently headed by a woman than those in the country. For example, Harlem, into which black people begin to move early in this century, it is the center and symbol of the urban life of the black American family. Kitchenettes and high surveillance also have a big role in urbanization. The kitchenettes were basically what we've talked about, um, how these people lived in poor conditions, multiple people living in one household, and it leads to aggression um, and just bad situations, and it doesn't end very well. Unemployment and poverty. As jobs become more and more difficult to find, the stability of the family became more and more difficult to maintain. This relation is clearly seen in terms of the legitimacy rates of census tracts in the District of Columbia compared with male unemployment rates in the same neighborhoods. Higher family incomes are unmistakably associated with greater family stability. So, unemployment and poverty, we see better family stability based on the income. If the mother is the only one, or if one of them is the only one bringing the income, they're constantly going to struggle with trying to keep food on the table, to maintain the household, to maintain their homes. So it just makes it a more struggle for them compared to white people that are accepted to better jobs and better opportunities. They're given higher incomes and they can live a greater family lifestyle. Wage system. Because in general terms, the black families have the largest number of children and the lowest incomes, many black fathers literally cannot support their families. Because the father is either not present, unemployed, or makes such a low wage, the black woman goes to work. And she works in jobs such as house cleaning, nanny, and seamstress, and basically woman role jobs like that. This dependence on the mother's income undermines the position of the father and deprives the children of the kind of attention, particularly in school matters, which is now a standard feature of middle-class upbringing. The dimensions grow. Extraordinary growth in black population. These changes are a result of declining black death rate, now approaching that the nation generally, and a fertility rate that grew steadily during the post-war period. Black women not only have more children, but they have them earlier. This population growth led to the crisis in black unemployment. Low education levels in turn produce low income levels, which deprive children in many opportunities, and so the cycle repeats itself. Chapter 4. The Tangle of Pathology. The tangle of pathology means the weakness of the family structure. The black community is forced into a matriarchal structure. The matriarchal structure is a fundamental duty in the American society, meaning having a mother and a father creates a strong household, and this is important in the American culture because it defines the American society. It imposes a crushing burden on the black male and in consequence on a great many black women as well. At the center of the tangle pathology is the weakness of the family structure. In a word, most of the black youth are in danger of being caught up in the tangle of pathology that affects their world, and probably a majority are so entrapped. Many of these who escape do so for only about one generation, and then the next generation, their children, start all over again, and that is not the least vicious aspect of the world that the white America has made for the black community. Matriarchy. The black American family life has reversed roles of husband and wife. As we've seen in previous slides, the women have been taking more of the dominant role because they're the ones that have been bringing in the money. The matriarchal pattern of so many black families reinforces itself over the generations. This process begins with education, although the gap appears to be closing at the moment. For a long while, black women were better educated than black men, and this remains true today for the black population as a whole. By October 1963, there were slightly more black men in the college than women, although among whites there were almost twice as many men as women enrolled. There is much evidence that black women are better students than their male counterparts. More important, it is clear that black women have established a strong position for themselves in the white-collar professional employment. To continue matriarchy, Whitney Young stated, historically in the matriarchy Negro society, mothers made sure that if one of their children had a chance for higher education, the daughter was going to be the one to pursue it. Both as a husband and as a father, the black male is made to feel inadequate, not because he is unlovable or affectionate or lacks intelligence, but in a society that means a man by the size of his paycheck. He doesn't stand very tall in a comparison with a white counterpart. To the situation, he may react with withdrawal, bitterness towards society, and aggression both within the family and racial group, and self-hatred or crime. The failure of youth. Children should stay today. Delinquency and crime. The combined impact of poverty, failure, and isolation among the black youth has had the predictable outcome in a disastrous delinquency and crime rate, the typical pattern for discrimination. On the other hand, blacks represent a third of all youth in training schools for juvenile delinquents. A stable home is a crucial factor in counteracting the effects of racism upon personality. A warm, supportive home really helps. Half of all the non-white rejects in the study with a counter record came from broken homes. So as we often see nowadays, it's still today, we see that delinquency and crimes all originate from growing up in a broken home. The armed forces. The ultimate mark of inadequate preparation for life is a failure rate on the armed forces mental test. The Armed Forces Qualification Test is not quite a mental test nor yet an education test. It is a test of ability to perform at an acceptable level of competence. It roughly measures the ability that ought to be found the average 7th or 8th grade student. A grown man who cannot pass this test is in trouble. 56% of blacks fail it. This is the rate almost 4 times that of the whites. This test nonetheless has the effect of keeping the number of blacks disproportionately small. Black people enlisted, or black men that were enlisted, enjoyed relatively better opportunities in the armed forces and the civilian economy in every clerical, technical, and skilled field for which the data permit comparison. At the recent Civil Rights Commission hearings in Mississippi, a witness testified that his Army service was in fact the only time I felt like a man. Alienation. The state or experience of being isolated from a group or an activity to which one should belong or in which one should be involved. Understand or not, the official unemployment rates for blacks are almost unbelievable. The black youth appear to be withdrawn from the American society. The black youth, I just want to summarize here that they're so used to being isolated from the American society that they no longer care to be part of it. In other words, the black male unemployment may be in truth be somewhat greater than reported. They lack the motivation of getting these jobs. Had the occupational structure remained intact in the future, the promises that were given, such as the social programs, or had the education provided to them kept pace with occupational changes, the situation would have been a different one and a better one. The present generation of black youth growing up in the urban ghettos has probably less personal contact with the white world than any other generation in history of the black American. They no longer feel the need um, to prove themselves. They're so used to the isolation. They don't want to be part of the American expectations in the society. Chapter 5: The Case for National Action. The object of this study has been to define a problem rather than propose solutions to it. We have kept with these confines for 3 reasons. In a word, a national effort towards the problems of black Americans must be directed towards the question of family structure. Moreover, family disorganization have been partially responsible for a large amount of juvenile delinquency and adult crime among blacks. Since the widespread of family disorganization among black people have resulted from the failure of the father to play the role in the family life required by the American society. The policy of the United States is to bring the black Americans to full and equal sharing in the responsibilities and rewards of citizenship. To this end, the programs of the federal government bearing on this object shall be designed to have the effect, directly or indirectly, of enhancing the stability and resources of the black American family. On this slide, I inserted some interesting videos that go into depth that talk about the Moynihan report. On the first one, the Negro Family Labor Report on NBC's Meet the Press. And the second one is Lyndon B. Johnson's remarks. This is his speech, and the third one is the one that I like the most. He was he was one of the students that were there. He witnessed the speech, and he basically reflected on how he felt about it and how it made him feel.